Now, the agriculture sector is sounding a warning over the ongoing blackouts. Agri SA says the country's food security hangs in the balance without immediate action on Eskom. Now, the utility has been implementing various stages of power cuts in recent weeks and is now nearing 100 consecutive days of rolling blackouts, which is the longest stretch to date. More hardship is to come as the electricity crisis deepens, and Christo Van Der Rheede is the CEO at Agri SA. He joins me now to discuss these concerns. Christo, of course, load shedding, a massive problem. We have seen the devastating, crisis this has now caused the country. From your side, of course, SONA coming up, what would you like the president to address and say at SONA when it comes to the food security crisis in the country, or possible food security crisis? Christo, I don't know if you can hear me now, just maybe acknowledge.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, you missed my first question, I guess.
Sorry for that. I don't know what has happened.
Okay. I'll just repeat. So SONA is coming up. The president will be addressing the nation. Of course, Eskom being a huge burden to the agri industry. What is it that you would like the president to address when it comes to Eskom and the crippling blackouts?
I think what is important for us is that the president must now really emphasize the urgency to resolve this problem. This is not insurmountable. Eskom knows exactly what is the problem. The presidency knows exactly what is the problem. According to the reports that we've seen, is that first and foremost, they need to get rid of all the legislation, or change the legislation, or soften the legislation, or bypass the legislation to make sure that Eskom can procure what it needs to procure. And then secondly, make sure that there's a regulatory framework in place to purchase electricity from your private electricity developers. And then thirdly, you must make sure that you deal with criminality and sort out these criminals once and for all. I think it's as easy as that. And yes, it may sound very easy as I've described it now, and we contend it's a complex problem. But I don't think the problem is insurmountable. With the right leadership and with the political will, this problem needs to be sorted out. Otherwise, the entire economy, and especially the agriculture sector, will suffer, and our people will suffer as a result of the insecurity.
Now, load shedding has more than doubled between January and September 2022 compared to the same period in 2021. How massive is this problem when it comes to figures, when we talk about money for the industry? How much has the industry lost?
According to a study that was done, the figure currently stands at approximately 28 billion rand for the past 9 months. Now, this is for us acceptable because that eventually translates into higher food prices. It eventually leads to profit margins that are really being squeezed at farm level, and it puts the farmer in dire straits because he or she is no longer in a position to really invest in what they do best, and that's farming, because they just don't have the money to do that. So yes, I think we have a serious challenge in terms of profitability of the sector at this point in time, and more so, we have a serious challenge in terms of food affordability. Rising food affordability will lead to a massive crisis, especially on the consumer side, and it can result in social upheaval, etc. If people can no longer afford food, if people experiencing or experience food shortages in shops and so forth.
Now, of course, this problem is also, it weighs heavily on smaller farmers. They are the ones that will probably be struggling the most when it comes to this. For example, the cost of diesel is very high for them, and they can't really get the needed amounts of diesel, for example, for production on their smaller farms to take place, whereas bigger farms, might have the capital to do that. So at the end of the day, they are struggling more.
No, I think it's not a question of they suffering more, because your bigger farmers has proportionally massive debt ratio to sort of cover, and they have to spend a lot more money to buy diesel and a lot more money to put diesel generators in place. The suffering is whether you're small or big scale, it's you are all of them are affected to some extent or the other. Small farmers equally so, but it's especially your commercial farmers at this point in time are really suffering because commercial farmers depend on electricity throughout the value chain. They depend on the cold chain to make sure that your products are not compromised in any way, especially the quality of those products. And more so, your abattoirs are struggling because they cannot slaughter enough cattle, they cannot slaughter enough chicken to provide to your retail sector out there. And that, in the end of the day, affects them to a very large extent even more because their investment is so much more and the risk that they take is so much higher.
Now, of course, we know that load shedding won't be, it's a problem that won't be solved overnight. But what are some of the short-term solutions, in your opinion, that can be done to alleviate this problem?
We've asked, in our media statement, we have said that the agriculture sector needs to be declared an essential service. You can remember that it was done just before the introduction of lockdown level 5 in 2020. And that, to a very large extent, was a saving grace of this country because farmers continued to produce food. We had very good climatic conditions. And yes, our country, as a result, benefited to a very large extent. This time around, we asked the same. We have, issued the same request, but more so. We say, let's look at a more flexible approach to load shedding. Let's do away with this rural flex system where farmers have to pay more during peak time as opposed to low demand times. And then we've also said, let's look at a expansion or an increase in the diesel rebate, especially for diesel that is now being purchased to generate electricity. That responsibility sits with Eskom, and now farmers have to take co-responsibility for that. So those are some of the things that we put on the table. But what is important is that Eskom needs to be empowered. The legislative framework that undermines its ability to act in its own interest, also the criminality that it currently endures, and all the other kind of issues that they have in terms of the appointment of competent people and the fact that municipalities are not paying them. That amounts to 60 billion, and if we don't address those things, then the picture remains very, very gloomy going into the future.
Thank you so much, Christo Van Der Rheede, CEO at Agri SA, for talking to us about the food security that's hanging by a thread here in the country if something isn't done drastically with regards to load shedding. Thank you so much.